integrity and how to advance it. We're going to try and get the balance right between accessible and a bit nerdy. But if there's anything that you want more detail on or you want a clearer explanation on, we will have questions at the end. You can obviously ask anything you like, but just wanted to let you know, please save up those questions. I also want to make it clear this is a lunch breakout, so don't be shy with the knives and forks. Please keep eating while we are talking. No need to stop. And I would like to acknowledge, of course, Bloomberg Green's title sponsor, Amazon, for making this session possible. And we are going to have a few welcoming remarks from Michelle Jolly, who's the Director of Sustainability Solutions and Services at Amazon. So please welcome her to the stage.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at Bloomberg Green. My name is Michelle Jolly, and as she said, I'm the Sustainability Solutions Director at Amazon. As a rare native Seattleite, I welcome you all. For those who are here from out of town, it's also so fun to see so many local companies in the room today as well. At Amazon, my role is to support other companies on their journeys in sustainability. Last summer, we launched a website called the Sustainability Exchange, focused on sharing what we figured out at Amazon: playbooks, case studies, resources, methodologies across 8 impact areas, not just carbon, but water stewardship and others. And it was our way to share what we figured out so that everyone can move faster. Since launch, we've included resources from over 70 other companies and what they figured out. And it's now available in 9 languages across 8 impact areas. One of the things we're most excited about on the exchange is a carbon credit service that we announced earlier this year. We've heard from companies in our value chain that they wanted help in this space, that it was an intimidating, highly technical area that they wanted to get right. They understood that the climate science said this was an important space to invest and drive solutions to scale. So we've shared our approach to neutralization and made credits available to companies in our value chain and helping them find high-quality credits. We're excited for the discussion in the room today. We have a lively panel available, and thank you again for being here.
And speaking of that lively panel, let me please introduce our panelists today. Please come up, guys. We are lucky to have Jamie Mulligan, who is the head of Carbon Neutralization Science and Strategy for Amazon. And we have Jerry Seeger, who's the Senior Director for Program Quality at Vera. So this is going to be a really interesting discussion. But gentlemen, I just said what your job titles are, but maybe you could give us a sort of 20, 30-second download of what you actually do. Jamie, I'll start with you.
So my team holds Amazon's long-term strategy for making sure that as we approach 2040, that we're able to neutralize remaining emissions with high-quality carbon credits. So we have a science team, and we're responsible for setting our science-based quality bar for the carbon credits that we're investing in, and we're the central procurement arm for carbon credits for Amazon.
And in simple. I'll try again. In simple terms, my job is to ensure that your carbon credit is doing what it says on the tin, that the claims made behind it truly are happening. I work especially on the verified carbon standard, a carbon crediting program, and Vera has a number of standards, also includes climate, community, and biodiversity, because carbon projects are having many impacts beyond just emission reductions and removals. And so we're looking at those programs and looking at where we can inject integrity across all stages of the project cycle.
Great. And picking up on that thread of doing what it says on the tin, Jamie, I'm going to ask you a question that is either very simple or very not simple. Knowing what we know now, what is a good carbon credit?
We think about this in a few ways. Of course, there's been a lot of attention on the quality of the credit from a kind of a technical carbon accounting standpoint, right? Like, do you have additionalities? Is this something that wouldn't have occurred otherwise without carbon finance? Do you have good permanence? Are you just measuring the thing in a proper way? You're accounting for leakage, those kinds of things. And I think as folks who have been in the space at all over the last few years realize that's a journey. That's not a sort of solved black and white issue, and so we spend a lot of our time thinking about the quality of the credits from an accounting standpoint. But when I think about what kind of credits do we want to buy as Amazon, the science team spends their daytime thinking about the quality of the credit from an accounting standpoint. But what we really obsess about is the quality of the solution that we're funding by buying those credits. Are these things that can really add up? Are we working backward from systems change, or are we going to find ourselves with kind of a portfolio of great projects, but that are isolated in their nature, aren't really having an effect on the world around them? And our viewpoint is we don't have enough time, we don't have enough resources to be doing this sort of isolated type of interventions. So we really think about systems change, and that's really what stands out to me. And when I think about the quality, what makes for a good carbon credit.
Mm-hmm. And Jerry, to you, obviously, some of the sometimes more problematic projects get more headlines than the very successful ones. But there have been sort of issues with soil carbon in Kenya, or some problems with some projects in the Amazon, Kariba, and Zimbabwe. Yeah, I don't want to focus on these too much, but what are the learnings of the sort of journey so far that Jamie alluded to?
Yeah, I think it's been a very interesting couple of years in the market, and I think it's very useful that there's been this emphasis on integrity. We absolutely welcome all of the discussion and also academics and NGOs who are adding their voices to this and giving that feedback. It's definitely been a process of continual improvement. I think in the broader space, we have now the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, which is serving as a meta standard for programs, and that's really helping us define what quality and what integrity is. They've done two things. One is to look at the programs themselves, like the Verified Carbon Standard program, the VCS program, and look at governance, look at emissions impact, and look at sustainable development impacts of those programs. And the other thing they've done, I think, which is even more useful, is to drill down to the methodology level. And methodologies are the individual standards, if you will, for each project type. So you have a methodology for addressing deforestation, methodology for forest restoration, and so on. And ICVCM has found itself sort of going down to that level and looking at which are the good methodologies, and has now approved several methodologies under the various programs. So I think initiatives like that are very, very helpful, and that serves the North Star for us. What is Vera doing? Where we have that next generation now of methodologies, and those are approved by ICVCM. I think that's very helpful. We have a version 5 of the Verified Carbon Standard itself. One of the big aims of that is on integrity. That's out for consultation right now. And so there's kind of these various things where you sort of dig down to the weeds and you look at that whole project cycle and find where you can find the spots to improve integrity across that whole cycle.
And we've dived straight into the nitty-gritty of the market itself. But I want to
excuse me for doing that.
No, it's great. That's what everyone came here for. But I want to zoom out a little bit to the broader context in which we're having this conversation. Maybe to you, Jamie. Obviously, some of the biggest buyers of carbon credits in the voluntary market are U.S. companies. And we are in an environment where there is some corporate backsliding going on around climate and changes to the regulatory environment as well that is much more permissive of that. So how do you keep U.S. companies engaged in the offsets market and in the journey that you talked about?
I'll say a couple of things on that front. We're a very long-term thinking company, and there's a lot of noise in this space. Standards are evolving. A lot of different viewpoints on what companies should be doing and how they should be doing it, and it's hard to formulate a strategy based on those voices that are coming at you from all perspectives. I think what really characterizes our approach is we work backward from the science, because that will change and evolve over time, and we need to account for new science. But there's a rock there that you can grab onto, and the core thesis is that the expectations placed on large companies like Amazon over the long run are going to converge. Whether those are voluntary expectations or otherwise, they're going to converge on the science. And we want to make sure that we're not caught flat-footed when it comes time to compete in that low-carbon future. And we want to make sure that our value chain partners are also on the balls of their feet. Most critically, that means we're decarbonizing. We're leaning our business from a carbon standpoint. But we also know the science is going to require large-scale carbon removals, and the capacity for that doesn't exist yet, and so we want to be ahead of the game in understanding how to navigate that, and we want to bring our value chain partners with us as well. We're not on an island by ourselves. We have this massively complex value chain, and we need to bring those folks with us. So that's our ethos, and part of the answer to your question, I think, is to try to evangelize that ethos, and maybe in settings like this. But the other element of it is the carbon market is pretty fraught, and it's complex. It's difficult to navigate. And I think there's been an awakening on that in the last couple of years in a way that it's difficult, but I welcome it. Now it's much easier to get traction in conversations, whether it's other companies or project developers or investors, about doing things radically differently, because there's an understanding that the way that things we were doing, it was version 1.0, and we need to keep moving. But it's difficult to do, and the kinds of things that we're doing, I'm happy to share more about that later, but it's very hard to do it if you're not a big company. We have our own internal science team. We have, we can create new coalitions. We can bring governments to the table. Most companies can't do that. We know that. And yet we have thousands and thousands, millions of companies in our value chain that have to follow suit. And that was really the impetus for this credit service is, how do we make it easy for other companies to do exactly what we're doing without having to build it themselves from the outset? And there are other elements of what we do as well. Like when we enter new projects, we won't take up more than half of the credits. We leave room intentionally for other companies to come on, not through Amazon, but alongside Amazon, to just create space for others to participate. So we're making it easier is really the bottom line answer to your question.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to come back to the carbon service in a minute. But do you expect the voluntary market to expand over the next 5 years? So if we look out to 2030?
I think what we're seeing is a transformation of the carbon market. And whether the top line number goes up or down, I don't know in the next few years, but we're seeing growth in some segments that didn't exist a couple of years ago. And those are going to continue to grow, is my expectation.
Jerry, do you have a view on that, market size?
Yeah, I think, what's been happening over the last couple of years has been very helpful. The voluntary carbon market from its start has really been about speed and scale, and there's an inherent tension there with integrity. But I think what we've learned over the last couple of years is that you need integrity and quality first, and from there you can build speed and scale. If you don't have integrity, then it all collapses, and so you can't scale. And so I think we've kind of got this pause a little bit while this all important work is happening right now, which can be a foundation for future growth. So I think that's the way that I see it.
And I want to throw one more thing into this complex interaction that you were describing, which is the Article 6 market, which is country-to-country carbon trading as opposed to the voluntary corporate market that we're spending most of this panel talking about. I just bring that up because that's going to be another source of demand ultimately for credits. There's going to be some potentially interesting ways that the markets interact. Jerry, do you have a view on what that's going to look like?
Yeah, I think Article 6 and Corsia as well is a source of demand from the airlines that we'll see. The voluntary carbon market has always provided innovation and learning into more compliance or policy-driven markets. Article 6 has two articles, Article 6.2 and 6.4, that are relevant to carbon markets. 6.4 is the top-down UN organized mechanism. But 6.2 is the place where you see more bilateral arrangements for projects, and that's where the voluntary market programs like the Verified Carbon Standard, and this whole idea of regulated versus compliance versus voluntary market is very much blurred over the last few years. But it's within 6.2 where you can have bilateral arrangements between countries that programs like the Verified Carbon Standard can support what countries are doing. Vera has 29 MOUs in place with governments around the world, and that's very much about capacity building around carbon and carbon markets to support their strategies. And so I think that's somewhere where the voluntary market can support Paris.
Jamie, do you want to add on how corporate and government sort of
Yeah,
entities were
we're on the nerdy end of the spectrum that you laid out at the outset, I think. But I'll say a couple things. One is that what we're doing and investing in is still, and I expect will remain predominantly a voluntary enterprise, but not exclusively. And it's inevitable that portions of our global footprint, are subject to compliance markets. That's the compliance mechanism, that there's a carbon credit dimension to it. And in that context, especially if there's an international dimension to it, we do expect this to run through Article 6 and for corresponding adjustments to be required. And so it's a little early days on this, but we're always going to there's a lot to keep in your head at once in this space. But understanding whether and how the voluntary standards that we're using, especially because we're kickstarting new stuff, and we don't just go to the carbon market and buy some credits. These are projects that need to get financed. In order for them to get financed, you've got to have a long-term offtake agreement from a credit-worthy offtaker, and so we're binding ourselves in 15-year deals, and there's some risk in that because you got to make sure that in year 10 or 12 or whatever, you're not, now there's a compliance scheme that's cropped up and they don't accept the methodology that we're using. That's a complexity and a risk. Again, we manage that by go to the science. We early on we made a decision, and this is before the Guardian article and all that kind of fallout stuff, that we needed to future-proof what we were buying, and in order to do that, we really needed to understand the kind of impact evaluation and science around it. We built our own science team. We decided we weren't going to defer to proxies. That Verra's doing great work, and we know they're going to continually improve, but it's not enough for us that it's a Verra methodology. We want to understand it. Our scientists understand it. And we think by doing that, one, we're going to bring new innovations into the market, and we think that if we're right on technical merits, then when those compliance programs emerge, they're going to gravitate toward the methodologies that we've helped to pull into the market and that characterize the portfolio that we're building up. So that's when you say Article 6, that's sort of where my head goes, is making sure that what we're doing now from a voluntary standpoint, and which holds water and has business justification on a voluntary basis. But if we end up needing some of those credits for compliance obligations, that's a little bit of an upside for us from a business standpoint if we're kind of qualifying it. So we got to make sure that the standards are aligning.
Okay. And now I want to, if we could be here all day talking about different types of projects, different types of credits, but I did want to drill down into a few. Maybe the first would be around deforestation. Jamie, can you sort of explain how Amazon thinks about this? What is an effective deforestation project? How do you
when we showed up in 2020, removals were all the rage. That's all anybody could talk about. And the IPCC 2018 report came out and just characterized just how much removals we need. And that hasn't changed. That's only intensified. So removals are a big part of our focus, our long-term thinking and focus. But in formulating our strategy at the very outset, we kept hearing these folks in our kind of circle externally, how are you going to ignore deforestation? I mean, we looked at it and looked at the IPCC pathways, and almost every IPCC pathway, there are a lot of things happening in there, a lot of hard to abate sectors moving and clean energy and all that kind of thing. Global forest cover is declining and has been declining, stops declining in 2030 in almost all those pathways, and then it rebounds to the tune of 2 to 5 million square kilometers over the rest of the century. That is a harrowing imperative. If that doesn't happen, then those pathways aren't valid anymore, and some other sector needs to go faster. And at some point, you reach a tipping point in our forests, and then the game's over. So we felt like this is actually the most important place where we could start. And we thought about the quality of the credit, and we were aware of some of the baseline issues that Verra is addressing before it sort of became commonplace, common knowledge. But what was more important to us, we thought the baseline issue could be fixed and is being fixed. So it was less about the quality of the credit, it was more about the quality of the solution. And in our view, we feel okay, well, we have to basically stop global deforestation, especially in the tropics. And the projects do great work with local communities, and they're definitely part of the solution. I didn't have conviction that we're going to stop deforestation with a patchwork of projects. And what we gained conviction on is that it's really government policy. If you think about all the levers to really address the drivers of deforestation, it's legal protection for the forest, enforcement of those protections, recognition of indigenous rights, better agriculture sector planning, so on and so on and so on. They're all public sector mechanisms. So we got to have a mechanism that really underpins that kind of work by governments in the tropics. So we anchored the Leaf Coalition as a founding buyer, and we brought governments to the table, other buyers, and this is now playing out. It's a big part of our portfolio now. But the critical piece here is that, from a quality standpoint, you're accounting for deforestation emissions over an entire country. Some cases, a large state, like the state of Prague, is twice the size of France, and so you can track changes in deforestation rates over time, and you're only issuing credits if those rates are coming down. And over time, you ratchet the baseline down actually until they reach zero. So it's very simple, and leaves some of our scientists say dissatisfied with the level of complexity. But it's a
I'm sure there's a way to add
like
more. Like
marry this with So we're very excited about it. This is a grand experiment. It's going to be very interesting how this plays out. But we still have conviction, at least on the kind of those core theses, which is this is a government policy measure, and we've got, but these are very low capacity governments in the tropics. They really need finance. That's the role of the private sector. So we put those two things together.
And Jerry, Vera has a new methodology for turning early coal plant closures into carbon credits. How does that work?
Yeah, so this is a new methodology released a couple of months ago, and it's for the early retirement of coal power plants with a just transition. And that's a lot of the resistance to moving on from coal, obviously, is doing the right things by the workers in the communities who are, who are part of those coal power plants and employment and so on. So this is a new methodology for replacement of that coal power with renewable energy, thinking about the workers and with safeguards for the workers and the communities there. And so that's available for use now. It's been developed with support from the Rockefeller Foundation. And I'll mention also we have a renewable energy methodology out for consultation at the moment. We're also consulting on version 5 of the verified carbon standard right now, where we open up and proposing opening up what had been restrictions on renewable energy in countries other than least developed countries. And it's in recognition, really, and that was a scope narrowing that we made several years ago, but in recognition of the fact that we haven't solved renewable energy yet. There isn't too much renewable energy in the world. There's still a lot to do. But you do have to be mindful about how you do it. Additionality is very important. Is the carbon finance really needed for that project? What was the baseline? So I think there's still a lot that the voluntary carbon markets can do in the power sector, but we do need to use the learnings that we've had over the years to make sure we get it right. And so these are a couple of methodologies that we think can help.
That's interesting. We had Vinod Khosla earlier on the main stage. I think he might disagree with you on that point. We haven't really touched on carbon removal technologies like direct air capture. Jamie, I wanted to ask you, those are very expensive. Things like forest credits are much cheaper. So conceptually, if there's anyone sitting there thinking about how to design their own carbon credit program, what is the right balance for an offset portfolio, and how do you decide that mix?
So we like to think about, what are the features in the IPCC pathways that are like definitely not on track, and it's sort of like breadcrumbs to help us understand where we could have an outsized impact in pushing things forward. And we want to be active across those things. And if we just pick the cheapest stuff, all these other things aren't gonna get off the ground and move. Also, there's I think seen some instinct from some folks like, I'm only gonna buy 1,000-year permanent technology-based carbon credit, even though it's hundreds and hundreds of dollars a ton. There's just not enough of that around. Like if we wanted to do that tomorrow, like you just can't get it. So you don't need to do that. We think about this as in sort of a blended portfolio way. We're going to start the majority of our portfolio by volume will be nature-based reduction coming from the Leaf Coalition and reductions in tropical deforestation. And then we're going to have a solid chunk that's going to grow over time of nature-based removals, restoring forests we've already lost. And then we're going to have a chunk that's technology-based carbon removal, and we're going to kind of right-size this to get to provide the right offtake support to get these critical technologies off the ground. And that's the balance by volume, and that balance will shift over time. Either the deforestation enterprise is either going to work or it's not. And if it does work, it works itself out of the market. and you can only save the force once, basically. And so we're naturally shift over time. Other companies have different perspectives on this. Some are removals only, some are technology only, and I think it's a choose your own adventure. But this is our own particular ethos, and I think it has merit, and it also allows us to, the global average price on carbon credits still, I think, is like $3 a ton. You can't do real climate, in my view. Sorry, you just can't do real climate mitigation at $3 a ton. So we're an order of magnitude above that. We want to start there before we add an order of magnitude and figure out how we build this into this kind of credit flows into our business in a sustainable way.
Okay, I've only got a couple more questions, so we're getting close to the audience Q&A. So please start thinking about what you want to ask. But I did say that I'd come back to Amazon's carbon credit service. I want to understand, what has the uptake been so far, and in a scenario where there are any problems with those credits in the future, will Amazon step in and do anything to replace them?
Yeah. Well, we've had a lot of interest in the service to date. I think one of my favorite, I'll give you an anecdote, I guess. I'm not going to give you the numbers, guys, but I'll give you an anecdote. My favorite anecdote is in having one of these conversations with a supplier, hearing from that supplier, this is great because I know I need to figure this out. My company needs to figure out how to participate in this, but I'd have to hire someone just to own this thing. And I would much rather hire someone to buy renewable energy for us or to, engage with our suppliers. And this is our supplier. So like I also want them to buy renewable energy and engage their suppliers. And we already have a team that can navigate this space. And so we can lend the benefit of that capacity to this particular supplier and all the other suppliers like it without them having to cannibalize their own resources for decarbonization. So I'm thrilled about that kind of. I think that's gonna really catch on, and it's helpful for us more broadly beyond just this carbon neutralization effort, but also on helping and pushing our suppliers to decarbonize. There was another part of your question.
I asked if you were going to backstop.
Willfully forgot.
Backstop the quality of the credit.
Yeah. Look, well, I think this is maybe one of the themes I kind of want to get across is like somehow the carbon market has gotten to a place where it's not okay to fail, and that is so problematic. Like you cannot innovate without failure, and so I think we're taking some big steps. We're putting some big things online, like a Leaf Coalition. This is a grand experiment. It's not going to be seamless and perfectly smooth along the way. I think that kind of standards and like insurance mechanisms, that kind of thing. I mean, I think you're thinking about like, is there a big reversal incident or something to that effect? I think we're on the cusp of a lot of innovation. Actually, Vera put out.
Go
ahead.
Talk to that. Yeah. So, one of Vera's early innovations was to address the reversal risk, the durability of credits of emission reductions and removals from land-based projects. So that's handled through a centralized buffer account. All projects contribute a portion of the credits that they issue to this buffer account. It's there to pay out. So that's been good until now, and that will continue. But at the same time, there are interesting new products available coming to market, insurance, for example. And that's part of the VCS, the Verified Carbon Standard version 5 consultation, proposing that we do a 3-year pilot and looking for feedback on how we should do that. So do a 3-year pilot on projects being able to use an insurance product instead of paying into the centralized buffer that Vera runs. You could also have fund-based approaches where the proceeds from projects pay into a fund, and that fund's available to purchase replacement credits when a reversal happens at site. I'd come back to this sort of complexity thing too. Because I think we have to be careful that the pendulum on integrity doesn't swing too far the other way. As you say, Jamie, I think we do need to be prepared to fail. Fail is just one part of continual improvement. Underpinning all of our programs is ISO standards, and it's plan, do, check, act. So we plan something, we do something, and then we check. And maybe things went well, and maybe some things didn't go well. And then we act, and we fix that thing. And I think we have to be careful the pendulum doesn't swing the other way. Otherwise, we are going to make our programs so complicated that it becomes very difficult for projects to implement. and then we just defeat the whole purpose of why we're all here.
Well, I was going to ask for my last question, what is the sort of key message you want to leave the audience with, but you guys might have just answered it. No fear of failure.
I've got one more, actually, I want to add in. Yeah, don't be afraid of failure. That's for sure. That's one of them. Actually, I have two more. Sorry.
Quickly.
Yeah, go ahead. One is like, everybody should be participating, just full stop. It used to be like, oh, you're a carbon neutral company or not. You're buying enough for your scope 1 and 2. I think that's, we're sort of over that. Everybody needs to participate. It doesn't matter how much. You just need to get your toe in the water. There's 6,000 companies globally that participate at all out of like 300 million companies. So if everybody just does a tiny little bit, and you're going to figure out then, like, how do I do this? What's right for me? Doesn't need to be a lot of money. Doesn't need to be a lot of credits. Hugely impactful on the aggregate. That's one thing. The other one is we have to have fun. There has to be joy in this. And this is kind of relates to the fear of failure, but like the critics in this space the first problem of the critics is that often they have a point, and we need to address that. But the other problem is they're just energy vampires. They're sucking all the joy out of what we're doing, and we cannot let them win. We cannot let that happen. We have to have joy in what we're doing. We have to take big bets. We have to be willing to fail, and we have to have fun doing it.
All right. Did you want to add one?
Yeah, I'd add a couple of points. I think the first is building on your point, Jamie. I think we've got to a point where we've got that sort of enough maturity and understanding of how the projects work, how our programs work, that we can figure out what is valid criticism. We take that, we learn from it, we do better, and then what is not valid criticism. And I hope we're getting to a point where we can distinguish between the two. Sometimes it might come from criticism might come from a place of ideological opposition to the idea of a carbon market, rather than a concern about a project or a program. So I hope we can start to differentiate between the two, so that everybody can feel confident leaning in to the carbon market and the amazing things that these projects are doing. I think that's where I would finish. Let's not lose sight of what the projects are doing. And I think it's something that we can do better at is this storytelling. Vera is putting together a number of impact stories, we call them, short films about projects. One of them is Delta Blue Carbon Project in Sindh province in southern Pakistan. It's a very degraded mangrove ecosystem. And the project is working with communities in the area to plant mangroves, to restore the mangroves in the area, provided 1,000 jobs. It's in an area with very low literacy. Investing in education, in healthcare in the area, working with local fishers to improve livelihoods for people who are fishing in the area. And the mangroves themselves are nurseries for young fish, and a lot of biodiversity impacts and benefits from this project. And so I think it's important to remember that that's the kind of impacts that we're seeing, and it's the kind of thing that makes me honestly just feel very small and very humble in my job, and keeps me and my colleagues coming back day to day to do what is sometimes quite difficult work, but very rewarding.
Thank you. Nice to finish with a real world example, but not finished in the sense that we are now moving to audience questions. Just raise your hands if you'd like to ask something. We have someone here. And if you could say your name and where you're from, that would be great.
Yeah, hi, Ben Lawson with Weber Shandwick. So, Jerry, you mentioned a pause point in the markets. I think, Jamie, you mentioned sort of moving from 1.0 to 2.0. Among participants or organizations that should be participants, what do you hear is the most common either misunderstandings or objections or skepticism about what that 2.0, that state beyond the pause point, is?
There are a lot of opinions out there on where we should take things. But I think a lot of that's how do I put this? I think that if each company really kind of grabs a hold of its rock, right, for articulated hours, everyone have systems change. We want to do things that can really scale and bring others alongside us. The solutions present themselves, and it's just a matter of getting those things in place, and going to the whiteboard and making sure that we feel really comfortable with the way that we're doing impact evaluation in those initiatives and the ripple effects of those efforts around them. And then it's about and then it's about iterating. So it's a little bit overly simplistic to say there's a 1.0 and there's a 2.0, but there needs to be ongoing innovation, and I think we're seeing that on a number of different fronts. I don't know exactly where it's going to go, but I'm really excited about the momentum that we now have. Sort of, there's some catharsis, I guess, and there's a space now to go build something.
Yeah. I think I'd add to that how you view that as a company who's thinking about entering into the voluntary carbon market might depend on the kind of capacity and how deep yourself you want to get into it. On the one hand, you can do the sort of the very deep dive that Amazon has done. On the other hand, for a company that doesn't necessarily have that kind of capacity, then there are lots of markers of quality now. So the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Market I mentioned has approved programs, has approved methodologies. So that's a good place to look. We also have what's called the Abacus label, which is a label you can put on a verified carbon standard credit for reforestation projects, and that's the highest quality with the highest impacts for a reforestation project, and that's about ensuring additionality at the absolute highest levels in a dynamic way over time, not just once at the beginning of a project. It's also about ensuring that you're not displacing food production from that area through the reforestation. So there are these extra markers of quality that one can look for, and I think those are some of the things that kind of speak to 2.0 as well.
One more, just quick add-on. I think something that will characterize 2.0 among many other things. In 1.0, it was like companies said, it's not my role to think about methodologies and carbon standards. Like, that's not my role. So I'll just point to a proxy. It's the carbon standard, and I get to say this was independently verified, and then I'm done. I think people realize now that that's not. It's necessary, but it's insufficient. And in 2.0, then the question becomes, how do you navigate if you can't just check the box that way and move on? And not everyone can do what Amazon is doing. Some companies can do what Amazon is doing, but I think the sort of the playbook of an Amazon of the world does this, and then makes our portfolio available to our value chain with this credit service. And I mention that not just because we have this credit service, but I think it's replicable by other companies. I think you can have other large companies that can have that internal expertise, figure out how to navigate it, and then pull their value chain in and make it easier for them. So I think if you're a smaller company, whether you're in Amazon's value chain and or you're in another big company's value chain, building those kinds of mechanisms to sort of ride coattails in a sense. And if you're a big company, I think you should consider replicating this kind of thing, adapting it to your own context. But I think there's real merit in this kind of approach.
Okay, who's next? Raise your hand if you'd like to ask something. Just hold on a minute. Can we give you the mic?
This point about adapting to the context, thinking back to the Nature Conservancy doing work with the Renewable Energies Buyer Association, I think it's been rebranded, helping purchase renewable energy, not just for the impact of displacing that direct fossil fuel, but also thinking about local environmental effects, better capturing effects on community, thinking about ecosystem and biodiversity. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, and I'm sure a lot of this is ongoing, how you think about carbon credit purchasing in a way that is really grounded in exactly what the company is doing, in the ethos, in the communities that they're based on. If that makes sense as a question for you guys.
I think I understand the question. Well, let me take a stab at it. You can tell me. I've seen some companies say, I'm going to buy carbon credits. I really want to tether it to sort of where my customers are, where my communities are. I think that's a fine and good strategy. That's not our approach. We're just relentlessly focused on scale, and so we're in the tropics, and and it's causing us to have some conversations about what kinds of countries can we go to in the tropics, and how do we manage geopolitical risk and those kinds of things. So we're deeply focused on scale, and we work backward from that. But there are communities there, and they matter. And so we care deeply about there's great opportunity especially in forest carbon initiatives to lift livelihoods in if you put up a map of like the scale of potential and where to go, and then you put up a map of like incomes and measures of social inequality, like it's the same map. And so there's great opportunity that companies can help to create for these communities to lift their livelihoods, but they need to decide. We need to empower them to not only decide whether or not they're going to participate, but also to shape how those initiatives will play out. And that's really hard. So that's just a flag, like that's a key dimension of this body of work that's really hard. But I think if you've got if the actors in those efforts have that awareness, this is like opera. The orchestra is playing. Yeah, I love talking about this stuff. I don't know if you can tell. So I'll pause there. The positive response to me shutting up. Yeah.
This is like last drinks at the bar, right? When they turn the lights up. But that is a sign. we are out of time. I hope that everybody enjoyed that. I think both Jamie and Jerry will be around if anyone wants to chat with them. We do have a little bit more time for networking. Around 1:45, if people could start making their way back to the plenary, and we will get things going there at 2 o'clock. But a big thank you to you all, a big thank you to our panelists, and a big thank you, of course, to our title sponsor, Amazon, for making this possible.